Well, hello everybody. Welcome to our virtual open garden event. And we are really pleased to have our Tuolumne Master Gardener, Nancy Piekarczyk, is going to be giving the presentation on drought tolerant gardening, which even though it's raining or it has been raining, we know we just live in cycles of drought. And that is just, the way we live. So Nancy, this is great information. I can't wait to see and hear your presentation. So go ahead and take it away.
Okay. And if anyone has questions as we're going along, you can always put things in the chat and I'll go to that and try and look at them at some point since you're all muted. Okay, so drought tolerant gardening. Can you go to the next slide, Debbie?
Yes.
Okay, there are some things that you consider when you need to do any kind of a garden, really. And one of them is, what do you want your garden to do other than just have plants in it? Consider your hardscaping needs. Do you want to grill, lounge? I have a place to hang out laundry. You have to put your garbage can somewhere. So it's not just plants. Make some sort of a rough drawing of how you want to use areas. And if you note if they're sunny, shady, steep, if you have water or electricity, you'll know if you have to put some PVC pipe in to go somewhere with a conduit or something before you start planting plants that you nurse around for 5 years and then suddenly decide you need to dig a giant trench next to them. And maybe put down if you have any trees or big shrubs or anything that you want to keep. If you're in so it's good to know if you're in a high fire zone area. You're in Tuolumne County, a good portion of the county is. And you're going to want to consider some fire safety issues while you're redoing things, almost no matter where you are. As with the Washington fire, we now see we could burn down the town if we had bad luck. And also there's a new Assembly Bill 3074, that has some things in it that you might want to know about. I guess I tried to put in a link to the basic things, but that particular link didn't work, so we won't talk about that later. But you all know that there are fire safety things out there about distances to plant certain things, etc. And then maybe you'd want to use woocals, which is something UC has made with plants in it that will really help you select maybe the kinds you want for drought tolerant ones, California natives, etc. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And could you click to the next slide, Debbie?
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay, this is just a quick picture of the high hazard severity zones, very high fire hazard zones in Tuolumne County. It's the one map on the right is the city of Sonora, and all that red is a high fire danger zone. And then the one on the left is the whole county. The bright red thing is the city of Sonora, but all the fairly pinkish red area is very high fire zone. So as I said, a lot of this county is considered very high fire hazard area. Okay, next picture or slide. Okay, now that makes some differences on your insurance, and so I don't know, can you click on that once briefly, Debbie?
Oh, yeah.
This was easier yesterday. This came right up. Okay, well, if it's not going to, maybe this is the one that didn't work.
Right.
Okay, anyway, it just shows the typical 30 feet out certain requirements, 100 feet out, other requirements. But, and you can look that up on the web, no big problem, but it would be nice to know that before you're planting a garden. But this AB 3074 is something fairly new. It's not yet fully in effect, but passed by the California legislature. And it requires a 5-foot amber resistant zone around a structure. So as far as gardening goes, that means if you plant things within 5 feet of your house, it does not currently conflict with the fire safety requirements because it isn't fully invoked in this county at least. But it probably will in the future. So you should consider that when you're planting your garden, also because it's good if your house doesn't burn down. And actually, I think Debbie told me yesterday somebody had an inspection by their insurance company who wanted to enforce that requirement. Was that in this county, Debbie?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so, you know, be aware it exists. About 6 months ago, they had put out revised defensible space requirements that included that, but then they kind of took it back because I think they knew people needed a little longer to do things like that. But, you know, it's out there, so at least it would be nice if you knew, and it's nice if your house doesn't burn down too. So next slide. And by the way, when I turned my phone sideways, did I make my picture go sideways for everybody or anything? Because
It did. It looks good, Nancy.
Oh, it's all right. Okay.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, there are a lot of different kinds of drought tolerant gardens. California natives, plants from the Mediterranean climates, and generally tough plants from other places that experience drought. Plants from Arizona and Colorado may need some water in August because they're adapted to climates with monsoons. And generally, plants from Mediterranean climates, you can use all the same sort of recommendations they use for California natives. But a lot of plants may be coastal plants, and these don't do quite as well in the foothills as plants that are more adapted to this area. If you want to look to see if where a plant that's a California native naturally grows, CalFlora has a website, and it will show you where they've been seen. I didn't put a reference to that in this, but be informed it's there. And sometimes that's very good information, because if you put in a plant from, you know, San Diego, it may not live here. It may be too cold, especially if you're up the mountain a ways. And then, like I said, tough plants from other areas may need at least a little water. And for that matter, so do a lot of the ones from here, but it depends on which ones we're talking about. We'll go into that too. Okay, another slide. So these are the things that will help pretty much any drought tolerant plant, at least natives or Mediterranean plants. It's a slight bit different for things from Colorado or Arizona, but okay, due to climate change, I think California natives or other plants from drought tolerant areas, you might want to think about planting something that's adapted to an area just a little bit lower than where you currently are. Not tremendously lower. You want it to still, I mean, you still want something adapted to your area, but perhaps the lower elevations of that area. And that way, in 5 years or 10 years or whatever, if it gets warmer, it will still maybe be happy. So if you're right at the border of the black oak, blue oak area, and you're planting some acorns, you might want to consider, you know, a blue oak, because they're generally lower. But that doesn't mean you should plant blue oaks at 5,000 feet, because they will probably die. there are a lot of microclimates in the mother lode. Plants that are adapted to their location do the best. Berms, mulch, and large rocks can really help plants. Berms can provide extra soil and drainage needed by many drought-tolerant plants. One of the things from permaculture is that to put berms where they can collect water from uphill running. So they're running parallel to the hillside, and the water runs down and sort of stops at the berm and goes underground there or into the berm, and will last longer come spring, early summer. You can even, to make a berm, you can cut brush or even small logs and put them on the downhill edge of a berm covered with dirt. And that will store a lot of water for things and also break down and give them nutrients eventually. You know, if we're talking log, that might be a somewhat large berm, not for your Sonora Hills front yard or something, but you could still put a berm there, a small berm, just 18 inches high or something, or even 12. And that really helps with drainage on drought tolerant plants. Mulch can conserve water. If you look at the studies done by UCCE, plant mulches conserve more water than like a gravel mulch. But big rocks, this is not in their research listed, but it's what I have experienced, is that large rocks can really give plants a cool root zone and a place that conserves some water under the rock. So if you plant a plant near a rock, possibly in the shady side of a rock, it can start growing there when it's a little plant and have a place for its roots to be a little moister and a little cooler. And then as it adapts and puts roots down lower, it can grow out into the other areas. And like I found that very helpful for Louisia and even California fuchsia. If you're in a hot part of the county, you plant them a little bit in the shade or just at the edge of shade or behind a rock. They'll grow out to where they like it later better. They want more sun later, but they'll get some roots down and won't die the first year. And then also rocks and gravel are not flammable and are approved for very near your house if you know, are trying to meet insurance requirements, etc. Okay, next picture or slide. Okay, this is just a picture from the repository, and it's probably a little further south of here from that palm tree, although there's some palm trees that can live here. It looks like a century plant, some, you know, but this could be any kind of plants depending on your elevation. It's just, you know, I might not put that tree quite as close to the house just because of fire hazard, but other than that, you know, like maybe put something smaller a little closer to the house. But so that's one thing to consider. I mean, consider how big the things you plant are going to get eventually. It's not that good an idea to plant a cedar 10 feet from your house. And it's very expensive to take them out later. So keep that in mind too. Cedars are really pretty drought tolerant. But anyway, next picture. Okay, this is Penstenum and California poppies. And, you know, these grow in the spring when there's a lot of water in the soil. Even if you aren't going to water either all or very much. If we have a dry spring, if you water, you know, maybe once in the spring, your wildflowers will do better, or even once a month earlier in the winter. But they're penstenums that are incredibly drought tolerant, and they bloom and they're pretty and they're fairly small for, you know, a small yard. If you want to plant, and deer don't tend to like them, they're moderately poisonous, probably not going to kill your grandkids or anything, because I don't believe they taste good, but deer don't like them. They may bite them when you first put them in and pull them out of the ground, because deer try everything, but they do not tend to eat them, at least the ones I've ever grown. Penstenum heterophilus is a good, very drought tolerant penstenum. It's foothill penstenum. It's one of the relatively local ones. Margarita Bop is one that they sell a lot. That one's probably the least drought tolerant of the heterophilus, but it can stand more water. So it's in the industry because people water too much. Almost everybody waters their drought tolerant plants too much and kills them because of that. If it's something that says it's very drought tolerant, you're probably more like, after about the first year, you're more like, and maybe even then, you're more likely to kill it from watering it too much than too little. At least most people are. Penstenum pseudospeciabilis and Margarita Bop, or sorry, Penstenum heterophilus is a blue with a pink tinge, very low growing penstenum. Only gets maybe a foot high and maybe approximately. Penstenum pseudospeciabilis is a little bigger. The very drought tolerant native one, the wild one that hasn't been crossed with other things so much, is usually red, dark pink, and gets to about 3 feet high. And it's, I mean, I just practically never water it. And it reseeds, it grows. I'm at like 1750 feet with south facing stuff, landscape. At my house, where it's very hot, in the middle of the summer, it likes it the best, or the wild seedlings at least grow the best, where there's just a touch of afternoon shade. Gets good morning light, but a little afternoon shade. Penstenum palmeri is a desert penstenum or perfume penstenum. It smells really good. It can be up to 6 feet high. Has white and pink flowers. When you say 6 feet, that's when it's in bloom. It's a little shorter when it's not blooming. They're just very nice, very drought tolerant. Pretty much don't water them in the summer. If you have a dry spring, water once then. And that's about it. I would never water palmeri. I would try to plant it with some gravel around the base of it. It's a desert penstenum. It's going to die because it's too wet, not because it's too dry. So, next slide. Okay, this is kind of a little bit of a rock garden. There's actually a mullein in it, which most people hate, but this was when the garden was very new. And hey, it blooms, had pretty yellow flowers. I cut it out before it set seeds. But it shows the rocks and things. You know, maybe shows how some of the plants are sort of planted a little bit behind the rocks, and that there's a little bit of dappled shade in the lower elevations. Things say, like a lot of times you will look at the tag for a plant and it will say full sun, but that doesn't mean it necessarily needs 14 hours of sun in the summer. That's hard on things sometimes when they're sages can take that. generally, but a lot of other plants would prefer maybe a little afternoon shade if you're at the lower elevations of Tuolumne County and it's 100 a good portion of the summer, and it's, you know, they don't really need 14 hours of sun. Okay, next picture. Are you clicking? Oh, there we are. This is in the wild, and it just shows some rocks piled up in the plant. That's, I believe, a sulphur buckwheat, and on the left is either an artismia or a sage. But, you know, this is kind of an example of what I was saying about a lot of plants just love a rock to give it a cool root run. And you can get, if you're in the, like Jamestown or below Sonora or even in Sonora, just, you know, one rock for something to hide behind can really help things get established. If you don't like the rock, you can always take the rock out when the plant's more mature. So anyway, that was just a picture from the wild. And insofar as I believe that's a sulphur buckwheat, but California buckwheat is a native plant and they have a dwarf California buckwheat that gets about maybe 2 feet high when it's in bloom. And it blooms from late spring until hard frost. The flowers turn color, and after midsummer, they'll kind of just be straw colored, but I mean, they're still nice looking. And they start white, then they turn pink, then they turn straw. But I mean, it's a really pretty little plant, and it is pretty it's drought tolerant. I have one where it gets a little bit of water, but not very much. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is obviously the lawn isn't drought tolerant, but all that area with bulbs really doesn't get any water. It just grows when it rains, and they bloom. A lot of those are tulips, but deers, you'll notice there's a fence because deers will eat every flower off the tulips if they can get in. But they generally won't eat daffodils or narcissus, or some of the native bulbs are very nice too, and they bloom a little later. So if you, and actually they aren't showing here, but there are some native bulbs in this area. And so brodias are very drought tolerant. Tritularia, they've renamed some of the brodias, but if you look up brodia, you'll still find it. Harvest brodia, Thurial spear, Wally basket, those are common names. And they have nice flowers, and they're native here. Next. And this is the demo garden, one corner of the section of the walk garden that gets no drip irrigation. And it's been watered all this summer, once every 2 weeks for about 4 or 5 minutes, just with a hose. I think maybe one dianthus died. It's partially shaded in the afternoon. But you know, even now it looks pretty nice. This is on a berm. I'm not sure if you can tell from the picture that it is, but so that's pretty drought tolerant if you only have to water it for 5 minutes every 2 weeks. And these are all plants that bloom and that look nice in a yard. And so next picture. So the thing to remember about natives or Mediterranean plants is that they grow and they're used to water in the winter or the fall to the winter, like about now to March, approximately. If they don't get an inch of water a month during the usual rainy season, you should water them then. Because that's what they need. That's when they need water, if it's a very drought tolerant plant. If you have a little water because of restrictions in a city or something, water your trees first. Even if you have to pay something for your extra water, if it's a tree that's near your house or a tree you really love or a tree right in your landscape where if it falls over there, it becomes dead, it will be massively ugly and you will have to pay someone to come take it out. That's probably going to be more expensive. Try not to plant anything within 6 to 10 feet of the base of a native oak. If you're, it's probably better not to plant anything under oaks, but if you want to plant something under oaks, try to plant only a few drought tolerant plants further away if you want them. Evergreen currant, once established and watered if it's dry in the rainy season, is a nice, really green, and it stays green, little low growing to about a foot high bush that needs absolutely no summer water, and it's nice under oaks. Sages can go further out in the sun or a bit of dappled shade at lower elevations. Lowlands media can grow there with no water, especially if you're just a little higher up in the hills, like from Solsbeville or somewhere, or just a little water if you're lower. Although I have some manzanitas, certain kinds, that have never been watered, ever, not once. They grew from a seed. They've never gotten a drop of water. They're just fine. Don't water them too much. But at the same time, watch out, try not to buy coastal plants. Drought tolerant plants need good drainage on a slight slope is good, which is why berms, one reason berms are good. Another reason is that some of the dirt up here is absolutely atrocious. And like if you live on total clay or even total grit granite, sometimes a berm can let you have a little garden that has a bit better soil. It shouldn't be too rich for natives. And if it's a plant that's adapted, a gritty soil or clay soil, like some of the brodias just love clay soil. That's fine, but not for everything. So some gravel around the base of the plant is good. Be sure you don't plant it so that as the soil settles, the base of the plant is lower and sits in water. You never want the base of a drought tolerant plant to sit in water. You see that's happening, try and like dig around one side of it to let it run off, because that will kill things faster than anything else. If a plant that grows drought deciduous because you didn't water it enough, it's more likely to die if you drag it in and out of dormancy by watering. So let's say you have a fairly drought tolerant garden, but you had some things that weren't as drought tolerant, or maybe that's just the way they do it. It got really hot and dry and they look horrid. They will probably, well, some of them will come back from that, but not if you water them and then say, oh, now I can't water again, and don't water them for 3 more months and you drag them out of dormancy in July. Drought tolerant plants don't like that. Some things go into a kind of dormant state and they still look good, like white sage, or I'm having a mental block, but manzanitas. They don't really grow in the summer, but they still look good. Even the evergreen currant I spoke of, it doesn't grow in the summer. It just sits there. It's the same size. It won't put on an inch of growth. But it still looks okay, unless it gets incredibly dry. But I mean incredibly, because I have ones that even after this year never got any water all year, and they're fine. And they look green. They look good, pretty good. I got a few brown edges this year because I didn't really water one or two of them when I should have in the spring, because we had that one river that gave us a lot of water, atmospheric river, but then it got fairly dry in the late spring. There are a few things I should have watered once in the spring, but like the evergreen currant got a few brown edges, and now it looks fine because it rained 6.5 inches 2 weeks ago. And that's about how long it took for it to say, okay, I'm going to drop those few leaves and grow some new, and I'm happy again. So just keep in mind, a lot of these things, there are certain things you can buy that will live in a regular garden, like Penstenum margarita bop that's very popular in the nursery industry because it's hard to kill when you overwater it, which is what most people do. I mean, they say, oh, it's drought tolerant. Okay, I should only water it every 2 weeks. But if we're talking drought tolerant, some of these things will die if you water them at all in the summer, like Fremontodendron and bush lupins, things like that. And one little story of bush lupins, I have a patch of bush lupins that grew from seeds, and they're 2 feet high or something, 3 feet high. And I did not water them late in the spring this year when it got kind of dry. I just didn't even think about them because they're so drought tolerant. And a good portion of them looked like they were dead. And I said, oh, I guess I should have done that. I'm going to have to cut those out and then let some new seeds grow. Oops. And then it rained 6.5 inches 2 weeks ago. And now they've all put out new leaves. So I didn't know bush lupins would even go drought deciduous. I had never seen them do that in all the years I've had them, because it just never was a bad enough year, I guess. This year they did, but almost all of them came back. So sometimes if it looks like it's dead, if you can live with it, don't rip it out until it rains again, and then put it in your mind to water it a little bit in the spring. Okay, next, oops, wrong picture. Let me go back. Okay, next slide, and I have to figure out how to get back so I can see it.
Uh-oh, this one is on tips.
Okay, I still need to read it, I think. Let's see, how do I get there?
Well, I can start off for you. I mean, just letting you know, you've got down, don't amend the soil when planting natives.
Okay, I'm looking at pictures of everybody. I lost my mind and thought I could change the page, and let me see if this works. Oh, okay. You all can hear me still, right?
I can still hear you. Can you? And that's okay. If that works for you, Nancy.
Well, read me the first topic or something, and I'll try and get back to something because I can't see it at the moment.
Okay. So your first tip, you've got a whole slide on tips. It says, don't amend the soil when planting natives.
Right. So don't amend the soil. They don't like it. If you have some, I mean, they just don't like it. They try to make sure when you dig the hole that you don't can't get back to the pictures. Okay, that you don't make shiny sides to the hole and don't dig in your dirt if it's like you dig a hole, you start to dig a hole and it comes out and it's like plop, a thing of mud. You want it to break apart. Have decent tilth. You don't want to make adobe out of your dirt and then try to plant in it. Digging in your dirt when it's too wet is the worst thing you can ever do to your dirt, or not dirt, soil. But okay, let's see. So, and make sure that the plant is up, you know, high enough. It's not going to sink down into a hole. You don't want it to be lower. If anything, put it on a little bit of a mound. And then if you want to, you can put a little trench right around it or something for watering it a bit the first year. But, you know, don't. Jeez.
Okay, Nancy, do you want me to read you the next tip?
Sure.
Okay. This one is.
Oh, I found it.
You found it? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, generally don't fertilize the natives. Most of them don't like it. I have occasionally had one, especially if it's something riparian or meant for an area that's a little higher than I am, or that I know just likes a little richer soil like Columbine or Cara or something like that, where I will give them a little bit of alfalfa meal if they start to, you know, like maybe plant them and they look fine the first few years and then they start to look worse. But I wouldn't give that to anything. Probably that's not so much for the really drought tolerant things, although there are some things like maybe fringe cups, things that like shade, a lot of the times they get a lot of leaves falling into them. But since you can't put mulch out right near your house, or depending on where you live, you might want to just scratch a little alfalfa meal in around them maybe once a year or maybe less. It has calcium in it and sulfur, and I know my soil is crazy deficient in those things. I have a sandy clay loam, which sounds really good, and it does drain fairly well, but it has the nutrients of nothing. It has no nutrients because it's very hot and they just burn out. So occasionally something very low. I think some places like Peaceful Valley Farm Supply sell things for natives too. I've never tried them. So woodland plants get a lot of nutrients from fallen leaves. This includes oak trees. Even if you have to remove them because of safety for fire or something, if you can leave them there for a while, a reasonable number of those nutrients will kind of come out of them during the rains. And then you can pick them up later before the fire season starts. Like I have under some oak trees in the circle part of my driveway, gravel. And so you don't want, you know, it's like a rock garden. So you don't want all the leaves rotting on top of it because then all the weeds would start to grow again. But pretty much every year I pull one little section of that gravel back, pile leaves from those trees there, and then cover it back up with the gravel so that the trees get their nutrients back. Because that is what gives, I mean, a lot of the trees collect their nutrients back from, you know, themselves, so to speak. Also, if you aren't aware of the word riparian means, like along a creek or by a river, if a plant in a nursery says riparian, it's going to be less drought tolerant, although some, like desert willow, which is a lovely tree, are adjusted to having water in the winter or spring. They're from desert washes, and those places dry up. So just, they'll be okay with it dry in the summer. If you have an occasion and you water a desert willow, because they come from Arizona where they get monsoons, you water them once really good, 3 weeks later, they will bloom usually. So if you have a desert willow and you want it to bloom for a wedding, 3 or 4 weeks before, give it a good watering, happy days, it blooms. Okay, oh, I did it again. Okay, good, I got back to it. Okay, change slides. Okay, now a great tool, WooCalls, which you've probably never heard of maybe, is an online program that allows you to select suitable plants for certain areas and conditions. And I don't believe there are any currently going, but there have been, and maybe there will be again in the future, grants from things like TUD to turn your garden into a more drought tolerant place. And if you, at least in the past, there have been occasions when you had to use plants from WooCalls to do that. They had to be on that list, which is pretty extensive. And then a certain number of them had to be drought tolerant or very drought tolerant. So if you click on that database, Debbie, I think this link works. So there it is. And maybe Debbie could type in Sonora or Groveland or Twainhart or anywhere,
Okay.
And then
see if I've got, let's see something close.
I know I tried Groveland the other day and it worked.
Oh, did it? Okay, let me just put Sonora. Okay, there we are. Okay.
And then I'm turning sideways so I can see this better. So the very low water use plants would be, the very drought tolerant plants. And low would mean maybe you have to water them once a month in the summer. Or I know that the Arboretum All-Stars, pretty much, if it says it's fairly low,
you want me to search the plant list?
2 weeks. Sure, put something in, like very low or Arboretum.
Okay.
And
I put very low and I'll just see what pops up. Okay. So here's a bunch of plants. There's pictures of a lot of them. And then there's links you can click to find out more about them. And those are all things that should grow in Sonora. And they aren't all California natives. And you probably wouldn't like all of them, or they wouldn't be appropriate for whatever kind of garden you want to design. But that's a lot of plants, to look at and get some idea of, now these are, I think we clicked everything, not just drought tolerant or very drought tolerant. I did. But
that's okay. You can select how you want to do it.
Okay.
It's good for if maybe you want a little section right by your front door that isn't drought tolerant. You came from New Jersey and you're sick of all the brown and you want one little area that looks green like you're used to.
Do you want me to I put in a new search. Do you want me to do Sonora again?
Click Sonora and very low water use or something.
Okay, I was on very low water use before, but you
were?
Yeah, but I was. But do you want me to
check certain plant names if you want? I mean, this is fairly obvious, other than the fact this Arboretum All-Stars are plants from the UC Davis Arboretum, which has a weather that isn't all that different from the lower elevations of Tuolumne County. And these are all plants that are tough in that area and pretty tough here. And if you put in an area like Twainhart, it would sort out the ones that aren't appropriate for lower elevations and give you them. So you can select all stars if you want and know that those are plants that are tough and people like them. They're not ugly. And, you know, it's a good place to start for maybe the bones of your design. Okay, do we want to go to a different thing, or do you want to do one more search to show something like all?
How about if we do one more search? And do you want to do a plant type? I put in tree just now, but do you want to put in a?
Okay, well, put in tree and hit all star or something.
Okay.
See what comes up. Very low and all.
See, and all star.
And all stars.
All right.
And see what comes up. It may not be very many plants for that, but okay, there's still quite a few plants.
Okay.
It's a good place to start.
It's an excellent place to start. You want me to go back to the slide now?
Sure.
Okay.
Whoa, that's big. I must have zoomed. Okay, let's see. So I think we already talked about everything that's left on this slide.
Okay.
So those are about the 100 easiest, toughest plant recommended for Davis and or grown in Davis, but they've done some research and things, and it's a fairly reliable place to search. They're not going to give you one that would grow in Davis, but wouldn't grow in your area if you put in the appropriate city name. Okay, here are some other places that you can look for things. Las Positas Nursery has a website with a lot of good California native information. Great place to look for articles. One interesting thing I've seen from their website is that they have found, just from what people have called and said, this isn't doing well for me, you know, landscapers and things who buy plants from them, although you can buy from them mail order, regular people can. And they're one of the nurseries that's somewhat like our weather. I think they're more coastal than we are, but at least they aren't San Diego. And they have said that they have found, and they don't know why, but they've just found this. They get a lot more people saying the plants just don't do well when people put them on drip as they do when they put them on either sprinklers or micro sprinklers. And that might just be, they don't know why, I don't know why. They just, hey, piece of information. But I think it just could be because, you know, it drips in this one little place and it's not over enough area once the plant starts to get bigger. Some natives, depending on what they are, don't plant them too close to each other. They send some roots out and they collect water from a ways away. So anyway, there's a thought. The Garden Company, which is local, you can go buy things there. 19870 Grace Way, Sonora, California, up just a little bit below Papa's place. Or maybe it's Papa's New Roost, I forget the name. Anyway, they have a very nice website with tons and tons of plants. Solomon's Gardens up on Bluebell, they have drought tolerant plants. The University of California has publications with drought tolerant native plants, a calendar of managing native plants, and wide garden with native plants. These are things that I think Debbie was going to try and make a thing that if you want it, we could email you later to get to. And I don't know if that's the last slide or not.
Well, I was wondering, did you want me to click on this link, Nancy, for the garden
If
company?
you want, it's a nice website too, with lots and lots of, it's just a really good source of where you can, you know, they aren't saying that they necessarily have or sell every one of these plants, but it's just, and you don't have to buy them from them necessarily, but they do have plants that they grow that are adapted to the Sierra. They're local. They grow a lot of their own plants. Well, pretty much all locally outside of Soulsbyville. So you buy plants there. They're adapted to that environment.
It's a beautiful website.
Yes. It's not a very big nursery, so don't expect to find all those plants there if you go there. They have, you know, what they have that time when they have it. But it's still a really nice resource.
Right. So, Nancy, I want to thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. And I am going to stop recording, and then everybody can unmute themselves and we can ask you questions. And I know there's one other thing in the chat. So thank you so much, Nancy, for this wonderful presentation.
Okay, thanks.